How should organizations adopt emerging tech at scale?
How do organizations justify their value and return of investment? Where does the responsibility start?
And as they do that, what are the top technology offerings? What are we seeing in the market?
And what's working and what's not?
I'm Prashant Kelker.
And I'm Dorotea.
Welcome to our new series. We call it Masterclass. We're going to explore exactly these kind of questions regarding emerging technology. And we're going to talk about how such technologies end up at an enterprise at scale. So, welcome to the second in our series on Gen AI and AI in general. We spoke about a lot of things the last time we met, Dorothea. We spoke about action verbs and what action verbs mean in terms of Gen AI and how Gen AI actually it stops us thinking about business processes and starts taking us towards augmented employees. Today we want to land that plane. Today we want to land that plane on how should an enterprise plan for this. So specifically, how should a CIO think about it? How should a CDO think about it? And around July, we started a survey on that. We went in stealth mode. We spoke to multiple, also many tech vendors and SIs on not just what their capabilities are, but what they are seeing with their clients. And we've launched a survey. I'm sure the link will come up in the show notes. It talks about what those use cases are, talks about where this will show up in an enterprise, but more importantly, what could be a reference model for this. So this today probably we're going to land the plane, Dorothy, as and maybe we do that with kicking off on enterprise architecture. What are your thoughts?
Correct. Enterprise architecture, as you know, is something that we're both fond of, but it's if you search on it on your favorite search engine. Unfortunately, people are eulogizing it. They're saying that it's dead in the water. No one needs it. AI has completely taken over. But actually, we're not really seeing that when you're talking about building those foundations, right, Prashant? We need enterprise architecture.
It feels like enterprise architecture needs to have a comeback. And you're right. You're talking about eulogizing enterprise architecture. Maybe we should do it differently this time. Because if we look at every other technology till now, call it social, mobile, cloud, it's always started from the IT department and gone towards the rest of the enterprise. This time it feels different. It comes from the CEO downwards. So if there was ever a time for enterprise architecture to play its role, probably it is for AI and Gen AI. What do you feel?
100%. So when we look at the history of enterprise architecture, sometimes this is forgotten. It was looking at high level four domains. It was the business, the data, the technology outside of this, but also the application space, which unfortunately this is all collapsed and merged. Now, when you understand these four areas, you know exactly what your organization's core competency is, and then also where you can partner with and who you can augment with. So we're seeing some non-traditional companies, whether it be manufacturing, in chemical, trying to be software companies with no avail. So they start hiring data scientists, AI engineers without that blueprint. So just like building a house or you're talking about the runway, if you didn't have that blueprint or your architecture, there is no way that you're going to provide that level of quality, service, and safety as part of this process. So I can't imagine any organization doing this strategically without having the foundations of a true EA.
You spoke about those four layers. You spoke about business, applications, data, and infrastructure. The question is, where do you start? Do you start with business? Do you start with applications, data, or infrastructure? Because if you start wrong, you don't know what you're building on. Should the landing zone come first? Should the data come first? Applications go first? How do you run all these four in parallel? I think that's exactly where you need enterprise architecture because we, as an organization, as a community, I think we'll be doing all four things at the same time. And what's worse, probably we're going to do all four things with different partners. And all of this has to come together. Enterprise architecture has always helped in two areas. The first area is standardization, and the second area is how do things interoperate with each other. Do you think maybe this time we get it right with these four?
I certainly hope so. We have started to lose the art with enterprise architecture here. But what people need to realize too is enterprise architecture is a vehicle based on the purposes you want to do. Do you want to scale your organization? You have a different architecture for that. Do you want stability and better operational resilience? Guess what? Different architecture. Are you a new startup? Again, different. But this is almost your encapsulating blueprint for all of these components to build that out. And you can't really start on one or the other. It just helps you prioritize which one you should be doing first. And that's one of the key differences that people need to understand. It's not a piece of paper that you just put into your filing cabinet or Teams folder or whichever knowledge base that you're using in the future. So it is a change. And actually, Prashant, there is what's been produced recently, the AI reference model. And that goes deeper into this, right?
Exactly. And that's the reason why we created this ISG reference model for AI adoption. Just because we see so many solutions out there in the market, there are so many ways of achieving the same solution. Different partners are going to play a different role. So maybe what we do for the rest of us is to take this reference model and talk layer by layer. So
Mhm.
everybody starts at the top, starts with business and applications. What if we do it differently? What if today we start right at the bottom? We'll start right at the landing zone, because I think no, it makes no sense to build anything if you're building it on sand. No point building castles on sand, right? So react to what I'm going to say now, Dorothea. I firmly believe there is a brand new market coming up, and it's called cognitive infrastructure. I think it's a net new infrastructure. It's not what you already have. It's not your existing storage, compute, and network footprint. This is net new because sometimes you're solving for time series, sometimes you're solving for real time data, sometimes you're solving for petabytes going in and out, data ingest, ingest. So some of this might be model aware, then you're solving for security and privacy. I don't think it's only the three hyperscalers. I'm sure there are going to be net new hardware, software, GPU, TPU solutions in the market. And then let's not forget about intelligent edge. Do you think there's a net new market out there ripe for the making?
I think you've just created a market, Prashant, and people are going to be ready for this market, but it's definitely the next level. So using another C, it was converged infrastructure and networking. So it was bringing, the compute and infrastructure together. And that was good for efficiency, but it still didn't, as you mentioned, the model awareness of finding the right fit or purpose of which AI to use. And like we talked about in our first episode, that human side. So the cognitive aspect here is saying, how can I match and synthesize all of this information and be aware of it, not just input output like traditional linear models, but I'm going to find the right fit and what is that supporting the right purposes with my enterprise architecture about that, which means it's a different model altogether than traditional technology or app systems. So definitely think that there is a market for that. Is it there yet? No, but this is where I would like to see more of the service providers, different partnerships coming on board. But have you seen something like this, or what are you seeing on the market in regards to developing it into cognitive?
You said something really important. Is it there yet? It's not yet there. And that's exactly where I think we need to see in the market a brand new service. I'm calling this cognitive infrastructure engineering.
Mm-hmm.
It's not saying thinking run for architecture or run for infrastructure. It is thinking build for infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So design design and build for cognitive infrastructure, a brand new infrastructure engineering service. I seriously hope that some companies take up, because this is exactly what we need. There are so many solutions out there. NVIDIA is coming up with stuff. I'm sure ARM and Qualcomm is going to come up with stuff. I'm sure that the three hyperscalers are going to come up with their own offerings. Then there will be others like Rackspace, Equinix, who come in and have their own offerings. There's going to be so many solutions in the market. Someone has to take what's needed for this organization. To your point, is it stability? Is it growth? Is it information intensive? Is it process intensive? Is it asset intensive? Find the right solution for this company. Find the tailor made architecture for this company. And you know what? Design and build it. Do you think we're going to see an SI market coming up in infrastructure, Dorothea?
I'm sure they're all listening to this podcast and they're about to be using cognitive IE, CIE. I love it. This is a new acronym for them. I think they need to move that. They also see that we talk to service providers all the time. They also say that some of the clients have a challenge qualifying what do they really need and how can they build it with their internal teams, but they haven't quite. We reached out to the likes of NVIDIA, to the likes of Rackspace to encapsulate that and then have it as a true end-to-end service offering. So it's a little bit piecemeal. Clients have a little bit here, service providers, the big tech giants have it, but have they provided this together to truly be ingested as something that's valuable? I don't think so, but it's something that can be built and needs to be thought more than just in the silos. It has to be an ecosystem thinking that everyone has a role to play. So it doesn't have to be so much competition. It's actually that co-opetition that we were talking about last time.
Exactly, cooperation. It's such an important thing. And as part of cooperation, we have done the first few steps, as you already know, Dorothea. We brought
Yeah.
most of these partners together, studied what
Yeah.
they're doing, and we have already launched what these reference architectures could be. So we over
Mhm.
the next few months, you'll see this come. All our listeners will start seeing how these reference architectures could look like for cognitive infrastructure. I have two learnings from having done that. You know,
Mhm.
it struck me much later after doing this. I'm so used to thinking of infrastructure as storage compute network. My new learning out of this is to add one more word. It's storage compute network data. It
Yes.
felt like now data became part of the new infrastructure.
Mm.
What do you think?
I love that you said that this is a learning because this is exactly what we were talking about, the verbs that you like. You love to use learn, create, and then continue to add this on. Because if we don't add that, we're not actually creating it to that cognitive lens. And I think we do need to actually be adding data as not just the information wisdom, but also part of the core foundations there. So that's really astute that you've been looking at it from that point of view. It's just like the original people process tech Venn diagram. You have the three there, but we're also seeing data there. So it's the two almost. You've got the one at the bottom in terms of your infrastructure and compute with the data, and the one in terms of the business processes. And if you don't have them in this uh, architecture or whichever business process that you need to have, you're lost because it's not a key pillar as part of this. But when you've been talking to the service providers or even some of your clients, are you seeing that trend, or is it still just being discussed at the high level with little implementation?
I think we are in early days there, Dorothea.
Mm.
You're right. I think there's a lot at the moment on what do I do? Is this my data? Is it your data? Is your data does it have copyrights, etc. Right, and that's fine. I think that that discussion is very important. And now comes the big but. But is this what things are going to look like in the future? I don't think so. It's not going to be only data.
Mm.
You know, Dorothea, maybe this is a good time to get into the second block of our reference architecture, and that is how's data going to show up in the enterprise? And we spoke about how data is actually part of the infrastructure, and everybody's talking about data now. But I think what's going to come very soon is not just data, but models. I'm hearing a lot about foundational models. I'm hearing a lot about topics like transfer learning. I'm also hearing a lot about issues of what happens when you buy a foundational model from someone else and you fine tune it using your own data. Nobody knows who owns the derived work, right? So I think we're coming into a new topic, and that is all about foundational models, transfer learning, transformed information, and this entire world which is buying now models instead of data. What are your thoughts?
I am so excited, and the reason for this is this was being studied 5 years ago and only really preliminary being adjusted to this. But now we're seeing it's going to be practically applied, and that's what makes me so happy to see this. So, the transfer learning component, someone's already built the model, they've already tried and tested it. So, you take the key constructs and then implement into your environment. Sounds familiar, like we used to have foundational data models, but now this is more the architecture, but this is the true AI and ML models that can be leveraged and used. The problem is, just like we can't shift and replace infrastructure so easily, lift up and just plunk it in, unfortunately, these models require good quality data and contextual data. That is one of the key issues here. So we're not seeing too much of repeatability yet, but the components are starting to be built. And so when you were talking about, which is now my favorite term, around cognitive architecture and CIE, I love it. It needs to have that. We need to learn, learn and repeat, just like those verbs again, and to continue on that basis of that. And you addressed something really, really important there around who is the owner of the derived data, who's the owner of the source data, who's the owner of the models. What happens if a client or the source data says, I want to pull it out? Do you retrain the models? What if the quality starts plummeting down? What happens there? Have you seen anything there, or have you had some great hypothetical questions in this space?
I don't know whether anybody's seen anything there, but I'm hearing a lot of worry and concern from
Mm-hmm.
uh, our discussions with our clients. They're worried, for example, when a model starts hallucinating.
Yes.
Who owns that? Who owns that? I mean, is it the person who trained the model? Is it them themselves? Or is it the person who gave the model?
Mm-hmm.
Do they need a new service called model tuning? Or,
Mm-hmm.
or ISG, please tell us how to buy model tuning, right? So I think it's a rabbit hole. It's a rabbit hole, Dorothea. And I think there are brand new services just waiting to be born.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't think this is prompt engineering. The entire world is talking about prompt engineering. That's not where we should be thinking. Prompt engineering is just making up for what models can't do today. I think
Mm.
prompt engineering is dead in 3 years. But what? Yeah, don't hold me to that. Um,
We won't tell them.
but I think it's no one's talking about
Mm.
what happens when these models are actually bought. Can you be assured that these models have not been trained on copyrighted data?
Mm.
What happens to third party risk when
Mhm.
when you buy a foundation model and your derived work has actually data from another based on proprietary data from another enterprise?
Mm.
It feels like there's on one side risk involved, but it also feels like this risk can be balanced.
Correct. And it's interesting because, as you know, in my past life, we were trying to do something really, really similar. But the
Mm,
thing is, we were doing this alone. And we thought we could do this alone in building this out. And especially foundational models have been there in the scientific community because a researcher can't do this by themselves. They need to share to a certain element. Pharmaceuticals do it again to a certain element, but siloed. Again, it's not going to be a foundational model for manufacturing of X drug. It's actually probably going to be test cases for that X drug. So really, really siloed, not the full ecosystem there. And you're right, people get worried about competition. They say, whose IP is it? How does this impact my rankings, my revenue, without looking at that full value chain? And again, going back to the AI adoption ISG reference model, the bias, the ethics there, understanding cognitive business processes, it's actually already enumerated. So it's not that it's not being considered. We can help people to get there. They just need to know how to answer these questions and who to partner with it from that point of view. But we're, like with everything right now, we're just at the cusp. This is the cusp of actually going to the enterprise. And this is why it's exciting to talk about that. Theory is coming into practice now. And I know we're going to have some exciting guests in the future that you're going to be talking to that are going to be providing some of those stepping stones. And hopefully we can get to see a little bit more of a real use case in the early next year.
and these use cases, like you said, might be research and science because at least those departments, those areas have started exploring these
Mm,
issues. Maybe there
mm,
are lessons learned there. And I was just talking to a pharma company, and they were
mm,
telling me their lesson learned. They had two lessons learned. The first lesson learned is they said the entire world is talking about LLMs, so large language models. In their experience, SLM, so small language models, and
mm.
ML, medium language models, are more important because you can go much faster and much quicker. So that's the first learning. That sounded like a good thing. Then came the
Mm.
bad thing. The bad
No.
thing was To train all these models and to make them really, really useful involves a lot of industry acronym and industry jargon. And
Mm.
you can't train what you have now. I'll just take a silly example. You can't take today's chat GPT and ask it to do molecular analysis,
Yes. Yeah.
right? Because you got to have very proprietary data fed in there. It has
Yes.
to learn an industry language. It has to learn a domain language. It has to learn the jargon and the acronyms of that language. And this
Mm.
the investments there are so massive that they're
Mm.
going in small little SLMs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that makes me think, okay, so as organizations are doing that, what are they going to buy? Foundational models, and what are they going to build? So SLMs, MLMs. Oh, that's it. You can trip on that. SLMs, MLMs, and LLMs. Are we getting into a buy versus build discussion on models?
Exactly. Exactly. That I think that's so. First of all, I also like the fact that you said you can't. It's not a silly example around ChatGPT because I think unfortunately a lot of people are using ChatGPT for anything. Talk about a silver bullet, but the buy versus build. And when we say buy, it's not just you literally take a foundational model. It could be take a foundational model and partner with someone to adjust it in your particular environment. That's so pivotal. And that goes back to the original point around enterprise architecture. What is your business's core competency? What do you want to retain? And then what are you going to be doing? Are you scaling? Are you actually just stabilizing? And then you know what you can invest in internally versus with your partners or off the shelf. It's really important, but it's not a simple question at all.
Do you think it makes sense to give guidance? Guidance in terms of two things: what is core and what is context, but
Mm-hmm.
also what is vertical and what's horizontal. And what I mean by that is, what are vertical models? I don't know whether you could buy these. You might get these from niche providers.
Mm.
So, for example, um, a pharma pre molecular analysis company could start giving models which a pharma company could do. You'll also see horizontal models like what Bloomberg has just announced, Bloomberg GPT, right? There are then data feeds, financial data feeds, which you could use as horizontal models. Are we entering some kind of a vertical model versus horizontal model?
It's a really good question, and I think that's where people are starting to realize they can't do both in one. It's just like business processes on the vertical versus the horizontal. We know that there is HR processes, there's finance processes, but that doesn't mean they know how to run a manufacturing plant. They know how to run a bank and all of the associated ones. There's context, but they're not going to be able to do all of the business lens. And this has to be also applied back to this. It goes to your original point, the infrastructure, the converged networks, and data from that infrastructure, almost like that horizontal, versus the one that needs to be doing for the knowledge. It's definitely doing that. And I'm thinking the question you're going to ask is, have you seen examples? Not so well. Not so well.
So, well, I know. Just living in New York has a few advantages. One of
Mhm.
them is you are in touch with a lot of capital market and wealth advisor companies, and they are so knowledge dependent. They're so
Mhm.
information intensive that you start seeing them experiment. I'm seeing a few experiments here, and I heard a term just last week, and we're probably going to hear this more and more, called model gardens. Okay, so companies are actually preparing to buy these models, buy foundational models, but also then create model gardens where some models are bought, some models are built. Into this model garden flows data, sometimes horizontal data, sometimes proprietary data. And they're talking about the care, nurture, and feeding of model gardens. How cool is that?
I love it. It's so much better than a service catalog for data, a data lake. It's actually showing that more organic and cognitive side of it too. That I love it.
I also like the analogy of garden because you got to nurture and feed these models. You got to fine
Yes.
tune, you got to feed this with data. Who owns the derived work? So,
Mhm.
analogy forward, and what are the fruits coming out of that garden? Who owns those? right? What's the fertilizer? I mean, there are so many things you can take as the analogy of model gardens. Uh, that I think that's the term we should be jumping on. Uh, I was just talking to someone from the West Coast, and I think Prashant, you're going to be talking more and more about LangChain going forward. And I was thinking, yeah, LangChain is good because it's an important technology on which you can bring together multiple language models and chain them together. I get that. I love the technology part of that. My mind is going to how do you buy and build. My mind is more on model gardens than LangChains.
I really like it. And you know what, also? With a garden, you can't just grow everything in there. Some things cannibalize one another, they don't play nice with one another. So
Mm-hmm.
I think, like you said, it goes to so many different directions. And you need to know, based on the provenance of where the seedlings came from, the foundational models, to how it's going to continue and prosper. It's a really beautiful analogy.
And that analogy goes further because if you go to the third part of our enterprise architecture, that is how do you control this?
Yes.
How do you control this? Brand new words I'm listening to nowadays, anti-poisoning. So now
Mm,
they're worried about models getting poisoned with the wrong data,
mm,
infected with the wrong data,
mm,
made to hallucinate. We're opening a brand new world of cybersecurity problems.
mhm, mhm. Which people need to stay tuned, because we know there's going to be a special episode just on that too.
Exactly. So I think we have so many of these blocks coming up.
Mhm.
Yeah. If you go back to what how you started and you said everything has to be thought of in terms of business, applications, data, and infrastructure. I think today we just opened the two boxes, cognitive infrastructure, and we opened the box of data, and we said it's not just about data, it's much more about foundational models. We got to keep something for the next episode. What if the next time we meet, we talk about the business and the applications areas? Because we already know now through our survey what are the top four areas in applications this is coming up with.
Good plan. And I think we're going to end on our three takeaways. So, do you want to kick us off on your first takeaway, Prashant?
My first takeaway is data is now part of infrastructure,
Yes.
and you got to think more than data. We got to start thinking in terms of buying and building models.
By doing that, I think we also need to know, what is that ecosystem? How do you know where you're going to buy and build? What is your enterprise architecture there? And once you have that, you know what next steps to take and prioritize.
Exactly. My third takeaway is you don't know where to start. Do you start with a landing zone? You start building with the use cases? Our answer is start everywhere. Just do it iteratively.
Exactly.
Thanks, Dorothea. Always a pleasure. And we'll have probably a few guests coming up on our episodes. We'll take our business and applications the next time we meet, and we'll also see what our guests have to say.
Exactly. Thank you, Prashant.
Thanks, Dorothea.